Okay, so hello everybody. First up, apologies. I've got a really horrible cold at the moment, so apologies if I start coughing halfway through this lecture. I'll do my best not to, but hopefully I'm clear enough for you to be able to understand. This lecture is some information about visual merchandising as one of the sections in your brief for my unit. I know a lot of you from speaking to you over the last couple of weeks have done made a really good start on your visual merchandising section of your shop report, of your written essay on your chosen brand, which is great, and lots of you have got lots of lovely photographs as well. But a few of you were asking questions over the last couple of weeks where we've had a few sessions of tutorials just to review some terminology in relation to visual merchandising. So that's what this video lecture aims to achieve. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. You can see at the top. Tomorrow, just to remind you, there are one-to-one tutorials available for those students that wish to have one with me. These will run on a sign-up basis. So if you look on Moodle and if you check your email, you'll see that I put a schedule up last week and I sent a reminder out yesterday with a schedule if you wish to have a one-to-one tutorial with me. So there are time slots available for you to have a look at on Moodle. What you need to do is, if you want to take one of those time slots, you need to email me on the email address shown there, so randalls@lsbu.ac.uk, and just say that you would like one of the tutorials and this is your preferred time slot, and then I will do my best to see you at that time. If you don't do that, then I won't be giving you a tutorial tomorrow, so it's worth thinking about whether you're at a stage where you need some more feedback if you've developed your work since when I spoke to you last week. Also, there's a visual merchandising activity for tomorrow. Again, that worksheet is on Moodle. It has been for a while now, so please do make sure that you complete that tomorrow and that you are prepared to discuss that in next week's session as well. So next Wednesday we'll be discussing that briefly, so you all need to make sure that you're doing that as well, and of course continuing with the development of your essay as well. So there's sort of three things going on tomorrow: your tutorials, your visual merchandising activity, and the progression of your essay independently. Okay, so visual merchandising wise, as I say, I know a lot of you have been thinking about this, and I've seen some really good sections coming along for this within your essays, which is great. So these slides are thinking about it more from, I suppose, an industry perspective, or a perspective of if you were to work in the field of visual merchandising. So there might just be some areas that over the next few slides that you may think, oh, actually I haven't thought about that and I could add that into my essay in the visual merchandising section. So a really good way to think about visual merchandising, and I know there's a couple of you that are quite interested in the role of visual merchandising as well, is to certainly have a think about which brands you think do their visual merchandising particularly well. So not just necessarily in London, but this could be sort of internationally, throughout Europe, key sort of cities that you think do their visual merchandising well, any brands out there, either big brands or small brands, independent retailers or large chains, could be department stores, but you know, being aware of who does their visual merchandising particularly well and what makes it effective in your opinion. So, you know, what is it about the visual merchandising that makes it particularly striking or effective in your opinion? For this essay, obviously, you're focusing on your chosen brand, so what their own visual merchandising is like, commenting on the areas that you think are particularly successful, but also noting any areas that you think could be developed further. So potentially their visual merchandising might not be as good as their competitors, for example, and you think that actually that's an area of a recommendation that you think they may need to invest a little bit more time and energy into reviving their visual merchandising style. So there are top 5 touch points. So these are the touch points, and if you can talk about each of these within your essay, that would be great. So you've got things like window displays, obviously. You've got also navigation around the store would come under visual merchandising. POS is point of sale, so the point at which the sale is made, so around the till areas, for example, what those kind of areas look like for the consumer. Any particular focal areas within the store. So if they're trying to attract you to a certain part of the store, how are they doing that? Is there a promotion going on or a collaboration going on? Perhaps a limited edition line, and they're trying to draw the consumer over to that particular section. And then also everything considering signage and branding in the store is also considered under visual merchandising. So again, that kind of links with store navigation, but how the consumer flows throughout the space while they're in the retail environment, that all comes under visual merchandising. So these are all things that, as I say, if you can think about these within that section of your essay, I think a lot of you have done a really good start, and you've thought about the window displays, and you've thought about how the merchandise, how the product has been displayed within the store. But perhaps you could also include some information about the navigation. I spoke to a couple of you about, how did it feel when you were in the store? What was the store environment like? Was it welcoming? Was it easy to look around? How did you feel in the space? Excuse me. What was your kind of overall experience like as a consumer? So these different touch points can help you think about it in that way. So the overall aim of visual merchandise is obviously to increase consumer interest and engagement with the brand, leading to increase in sales and building a positive image of the brand. So that's a kind of general overview of what, a successful visual merchandising strategy aims to achieve. So the role itself, a few of you have been asking about what it's like to work in a visual merchandising role. Some of you, as I say, were sort of saying that could be potentially something that you may be interested in the future when you graduate. I think it's an area that people think it sounds quite fun. It sounds quite exciting. It sounds certainly very creative. And it absolutely is, dependent on the brand and the size of the brand and the size of your role within that brand. I would say, of all of the roles, it certainly is a creative role. It definitely is a hands-on role. And it's a fulfilling role. So it's definitely got a lot of things going for it. But I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of work, the amount of physical work associated with visual merchandising. So it takes a lot of physical effort to get potentially some of these window displays looking as fantastic as they do. That normally will involve long hours, antisocial hours. So if you think about window displays, you occasionally see them being installed in the daytime, but most likely they're installed antisocial hours, so sort of overnight when the store's closed and when there's no consumers in the store. So it may be that you're doing a window fit from 10 o'clock in the evening until the more early hours of the morning, for example. So not necessarily working a 9 to 5 role. And it's definitely manual, so you've got to have an element of or be able to develop an element of physical strength, so being able to, hold mannequins. A mannequin itself is generally quite heavy, so being able to manoeuvre mannequins around the store, lifting them into the windows, making sure that you're in a position where you can do that, and all of that is part of the role as well. So it's certainly not a 9 to 5 desk job. As something like, for example, a merchandising role might be in the fashion industry. So that works for some people, and other people think, oh, actually, I'm not sure that's for me. I have other commitments and I can't work outside 9 to 5. This is obviously very, very much dependent on the brands, the size of the brands, and the area of the market that they're in as well. So this is a very generic overview. This doesn't necessarily mean this is the same for every brand, so don't rule it out based on any of this information necessarily, but it's just worth considering the role overall. So skills that you need. So again, these are the top sort of skills that we've collated in terms of what you need to work as a visual merchandiser. So certainly having an eye for detail and standards, maintaining neatness of the product and styling is important. Understanding of sales and buying schedules, so understanding how the buying team work is actually really important to a visual merchandiser in terms of understanding stock rotation, so thinking about what product is going to come in at a certain time. You might not necessarily think about that, but obviously that's really important for the visual merchandising team to know what product's coming in and when it's coming in, so that they can then plan their window displays around that and think about how they're going to merchandise the product when it actually arrives. What to push when, so what key products are coming in. If there's any collaborations or limited edition lines, for example, they're going to be kind of push points. what product they're pushing at certain points, if it links in with certain calendar events, for example, as well. As I say, being a morning person or indeed an evening person is good. So being prepared to work either early starts, so maybe 5 or 6 in the morning starts, or potentially the other end of the scale and not starting work until the evening, sort of 8, 9, 10 o'clock when the store is closed, to be able to do the window installs and the general merchandising of the stock when the consumers and the stores are not open. So good communication skills is really important. So if you're thinking about, if you're working as a team, which you generally are, to install visual merchandising displays, making sure that everybody understands what the overall aim is, everybody's trying to achieve the same thing, there's no miscommunication, no misunderstanding of how the window's going to look or how the overall feel of the store is going to be. There tends to always be clear guidelines as well to follow, but just making sure that there's clear direction for the whole team is really important. Having an interest in brand identity, I think, is a really important one for visual merchandising. So understanding who the brand are that you're working for and how they wish to portray themselves, how they wish to put themselves out there to the consumer and be represented as a brand. So it's not just about how to make the product itself look nice, it's also about how to present the brand as an overall what the perception of the brand is that you're trying to get across to the consumer. And having a mix of creative ideas and hands-on action, I think, goes particularly well for visual merchandising. So being somebody that's creative, but also somebody that's not afraid to get stuck in at the deep end and really kind of, be part of the action, as it were. So brand DNA. So think about your brand, so the brand that you're writing your essay on. What is their DNA? So who are they as a brand? What are the factors that make them successful? If you asked the brand to describe themselves, how would they describe themselves? What is their ethos? What's their mission statement? What are they trying to kind of achieve as a brand overall? And how does the brand reflect that in their visual merchandising? Do they reflect that in their visual merchandising, or do you think that's an area that they could improve on? Also, as I've spoken about lots of times, the layout of your essay. So can you reflect your brand visually in the layout of your essay? Thinking about colour palette, typography, so different font styles, brand personality and styling techniques. So thinking about who your brand are visually overall. You may wish to do a kind of mood board or a Pinterest board to build up a visual identity of who your consumer is, who your brand is, and then to think about how you can then feed that into your essay slightly creatively as well. So the theme of visual merchandising, you sometimes might see themes. So obviously this example here this is from a Mulberry window a few years back. I think it was around about 2014-15, and it was obviously focusing on Valentine's Day. So you've got the big red heart with the mannequin sitting within the heart in the window. So will you be designing your visual merchandising around a theme is something that you might think about as a visual merchandiser. At the moment, obviously, we've got Christmas coming up, so in just over a month. So you'll start to see Christmas window displays popping up around town. Is that something that your brand has already started to do? Does the window already look festive? Does the store environment already look festive? What themes are coming up is really important to think about as a visual merchandiser. So this can include special calendar events, again, reflected in the styling, the colour, the design, any collaborations that they might be trying to push or they've launched recently, that would be considered as a theme or a special event. If they're doing any pop-up spaces, so obviously some brands have temporary spaces that they pop up. I noticed in Waterloo Station this week, and at the end of last week they were doing a Not on the High Street, were doing a pop-up store in the middle of Waterloo Station, and it was absolutely packed. So that's a really great incentive for that brand to get themselves out there in a physical space. Obviously they're an online retailer, or they're an online platform, and they've put themselves in the middle of a busy train station, promoting themselves in a physical environment. So have your brand ever done any pop-up spaces, or are they considering doing any pop-up spaces? And if so, how would they work for the brand? And are there any social media related events around your brand as well? So how do they use social media? We've spoken a lot about how brands present themselves on different platforms, so in physical environments versus on digital or online platforms. So how do your brand do that? How do your brand present themselves on these different platforms? Product assortment is another term that you can think about. So what does your product look like? What's the range of product? What's the stock like at that particular moment for that particular season, perhaps? And how would be the best way of presenting it for maximum impact? So think about the actual product that your brand is selling. It sounds really obvious, but sometimes a product that looks really simple to display is one of the most complicated. An example of this is a handbag. So you think a handbag might be quite easy to display, but you've got to think about the different elements of that bag. So you've got the handles of the handbag. How are you going to present those? Do you need to see the handles? Does the handbag support itself when it's empty, or does it sort of slouch down and look a bit messy? If so, are you going to need to stuff the handbag with some paper to make it more rigid so that it can stand up by itself? And do you have any product that's an awkward sort of shape or style? And how are you going to make it look good? So, even something like a basic line, like a range of tops or trousers, if they've not got necessarily any design features or they don't look necessarily striking as a product, how are you going to make them look impactful in a window display or as part of a store display without just looking like a pile of folded up t-shirts, if that's not what your brand are aiming to achieve? Excuse me. So space allocation. So how much space is in the store? So this is relevant if it's a standalone store or if it's a concession within a department store. If you're looking at a flagship store, potentially that space is a lot larger than one of their smaller outlets. So how much space do you have to play with? When you work as a visual merchandiser, you're constantly thinking about the space and reviewing the space that you've got. It's a blank canvas, but it's a set canvas, so you can't make the space any bigger, or you can't necessarily adjust the space. You've got to work with the space, and you've got to make the success come from the space itself. Thinking about things like lighting. So again, when you go back to thinking about your visual merchandising, think about the senses. So your senses, your 5 senses. How well lit was the space? How well displayed was the product within that space? Will the consumer be able to easily flow around that space, or was it quite tight? Was it quite crammed? Potentially it was quite busy, so you couldn't really look around the product very well, or potentially they had really big display stands that made it quite difficult to navigate around the space. What was the sound like? So again, not necessarily just sound that they're playing into the store, so music, but the actual building itself. What were the acoustics of the building like? Was it kind of echoey, or was it quite dingy, or was it did it echo? What was the space like in general? Did it feel cosy and warm, or did it feel quite cold and quite stark as a space? So you're thinking about all these different things before you're even thinking about the product here. You're just thinking about the actual canvas of the store itself and how that feels to be in. Props. So will you have access to props? These are questions as a visual merchandiser that you're always thinking about. So props being plinths, mannequins, moving images or objects, any vinyl, so any lettering or symbols or stickers on the windows. Are there any walls in the space, either permanent walls or temporary walls that you're going to build? What's the flooring like? Is it nice soft carpet, or is it hard concrete, or is it laminate wood? What's the floor like? How does that feel? Particularly important if you're looking at footwear as a brand. So footwear consumers generally want to try on. So you're basically asking them to take their shoes off and put a pair of shoes on. So how does that space work? Is there a nice comfy sofa that they can sit on to take their shoes off and put your brand's shoes on? Is there a nice kind of carpeted area or a rug where they can take their shoes off so they're not standing on freezing cold floor? Or how does that kind of play out in terms of how they then interact with the product? So these are all the kind of objects, if you like, around the space. Again, before you even thought about the product, you're thinking about the space and then the objects or the items within the space that you're then going to use to the advantage of displaying the product. So there's 4 different scenarios where the consumer will generally see a collection of a brand. If they are buyers, they tend to be invited to the showroom. So if you work as a buyer, you might get invited to a special event before the consumer itself is invited in to have a look at the preview of the collection. Catwalk shows are obviously where the press start to get involved. Again, you might get special invitations sent out to key people in the industry to come and have a look at the product on the catwalk. Stores are where the consumer themselves come in, so the actual physical retail environment is where the consumer comes in and has a look at the product. And then any events, so any pop-up events or any collaborative events or any social media events that the brand then use. Dependent on what the event is, they may be open to everyone or they may be open by invitation only to select people on their list of guests. But the important thing is that these 4 areas all need to have an element of consistency. So they all need to be consistent in the way that the brand is represented, but also in the way that the product is represented. And that's really important for you to think about when you're reviewing your overall visual merchandising strategy of your brand, is how successful your brand are across different platforms. So it's one thing being amazing in a retail environment, but what about if their online environment is not as good? Or it's one thing to have a fantastic catwalk event and a fantastic level of events, but if the retail environment doesn't then live up to that, then that's a potential area of disappointment for the consumers, which is obviously not a great start in terms of where the buying power then lies. So just to review some of the things that we've spoken about, so you've got store navigation, different levels of presentation, how the product and the flow of the store is, different display techniques, different visual merchandising standards, focal areas and point of sale. So if you can touch on some of these areas within your essay, within the visual merchandising section, that would be really great. And hopefully there's something in here that you think, oh, actually that's something that I could add into my essay. And just have a go at writing some more content for it, and then we can review it in some of the remaining tutorial times that we've got left. This is just a little diagram that was taken out of one of the visual merchandising books. So think about the eye level. So think about, as a consumer, generally how they are viewing a product. So this just gives you an idea. So you've got the kind of non-focal area at the top, so the top shelf, if you like. The primary focus is directly in eye level of the consumer, so it's what they see, what's straight ahead of them when they look at a product display. Secondary focus is where their hands are, so what's kind of in hand reach or reaching distance for the consumer. And then foot level, again, is non-focal, so you've got the kind of green and the red areas, and that's, you know, thinking about how the product is displayed. What were the different levels of the product? How would the consumer then interact with those? And how do your brand utilise that? Hopefully to their advantage, but if not, could they utilise that to their advantage? So I've gone through this lots of times, but make sure you include high resolution, really nice quality photos of your brand's visual merchandising within your essay, and please make sure that you remember to analyse them. Okay, so pop the photos in there, but do explain them as well. So you don't need to go into lots and lots of detail. You don't need to literally explain what the photo shows. You need to think more about why that's important. Okay, so this is what the visual merchandising style is like, and this is what it means for my brand, or this is how the consumer then interacts with that as a result. Okay, so you're analysing them rather than explaining what they show. You're thinking about why rather than what. So how you present your essay overall, making it visual and informative. Okay, so hopefully that's given you some food for thought, as I say, and that's given you maybe a couple of more areas to think about within your visual merchandising, a few more different terminologies that you may wish to include within that section of your essay. So just to remind you for tomorrow, so tomorrow, Wednesday the 21st of November, I've got some time slots. These are on Moodle for you. This has been on Moodle since last Wednesday. I think I popped it on there, and I sent out a reminder notification about it over email yesterday. So these are time slots for sign-up tutorials for students who need them. You only need to see me if you have specific questions or work that has progressed since you saw me last week. So if you haven't developed your essay since last week, and you don't have any questions since last week, and you spoke to me last week, you don't necessarily have to come in and show me the same content this week. I would rather you spend the time progressing with your essay and developing it from last week. However, if you have got a section or you've developed certain sections from last week, or indeed if you didn't see me last week, there was a couple of people that I didn't see last week, so I would like to see those people tomorrow, please. I need you to email me today. You've got all day today, or certainly first thing tomorrow morning before 11 o'clock. My email address is there, so randallse@lsbu.ac.uk. It's there in the orange. Send me an email and say which time slot of the list below. So there's time slots between 11 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. tomorrow. Send me a send me an email with your name and just say I'd like to see you at 11:30, for example, tomorrow. And then I will then be able to put you on the schedule, and that's the time that we will meet in our normal classroom of LR246 at that time slot. After 12:30, so 12:30 to 2 o'clock, you'll be working on your visual merchandising activity, which is available through Moodle. You'll see that on there within week 9, session 9 on Moodle, as well as progressing with your essay independently. There are only 3 weeks left until your summative deadline, okay? So you really need to be making some really good progress at this stage. Obviously, again, you're going to be listening to this video tomorrow if you haven't listened to it today, so that's also part of the content that's being delivered tomorrow. So just make sure that you're using the time wisely. Please don't think that because you haven't got lectures tomorrow that you shouldn't be working on your essay. However, you should be working on your essay in the most productive way for you at the stage that you're at on your essay. So this is the worksheet that's on Moodle for tomorrow. So you have got that on Moodle for you. Use this. It's got a series of 12 questions to think about in terms of visual merchandising, focusing on your chosen retailer, thinking about certain visual merchandising points. So again, even if you've already started your visual merchandising section, you can still be doing this part of this piece of work. You might be thinking about different things. So you may not have thought about plinths or moving images or vinyl or wall covering or flooring, for example. You may have only thought about mannequins. So you might want to just review that section and add some more depth to it. So thinking about different areas of visual merchandising, there's so many different touch points rather than just the most obvious ones. So have a look at this list and be prepared to discuss that with us next week. So again, just to recap so that you're really super clear what's going on. So you've got this video lecture to either listen to today or tomorrow, your one-to-one tutorials that you need to send me an email in advance to sign up for a time, and then you've got the visual merchandising activity with the worksheet available on Moodle. So there's those 3 things. That's what's happening tomorrow. If you do have any questions or if you would like to ask me to clarify anything about what's happening tomorrow again, please do send me an email, okay? But hopefully this video has made that really clear and it's given you some direction to work on tomorrow. Okay, thanks very much.